Welcome, everybody. I'm Lori Wallach. I'm the director of the Rethink Trade program at American Economic Liberties Project. Welcome to our event today, and special welcome to Senators Warren and Congresswoman Schakowsky and Congressman Takano. Today, Rethink Trade is releasing an investigative report that reveals big tech's ploy to internationally preempt top congressional and White House initiatives to protect our privacy, to battle big tech monopolies, to ensure algorithmic justice and transparency, making sure AI isn't discriminating against us or invading our rights. And all of these important policies could be undermined by big tech's plan to try and insert into international trade agreements so-called digital trade rules that would effectively undermine Congress's and the White House's policy space to do everything the public expects and needs with respect to big tech. Congress and the White House have really geared up to try and enact policies to counter the harms to workers, to consumers, to smaller businesses from the big tech giants that are now dominating global retail, transportation, communications, advertising. And so the tech firms have opened a new front of attack. It's actually through a back door. It's through trade agreements, where closed door negotiations provide a great opportunity to try and insert binding international rules that could undermine important domestic initiatives in the United States, but around the world. And we've seen this happen before, when Big Pharma in the 90s inserted new extended monopoly protections that locked in obliging countries to have lengthy patent protections for medicines that now result in higher prices. So as the lawmakers who are joining us today are fighting on the front lines, Congresswoman Schakowsky, a leader of the major bipartisan bill on privacy from the previous Congress, fighting to limit online surveillance, counter the exploitation of personal data, bills like Mr. Takano's, which are trying to protect our civil rights, his Justice and Forensic Algorithms Act, policies like Senator Warren's anti-monopoly rules, and there are many other bills. These are the initiatives that big tech has been fighting to derail. And in the previous Congress, they managed to lobby some of them down. But they're all being reintroduced. And as we saw with the president's State of the Union speech, protecting privacy, battling corporate monopolies, ensuring civil rights and workers' rights are the priority not just of this White House, but of people across the country. And these members of Congress have bills to actually enact this broadly supported agenda. Yet the big tech firms are hoping to undo this through trade negotiations. So this report, which my colleague Daniel Rangel, who is the primary author and investigator, will walk us through with slides after we hear from the members of Congress. This report goes specifically to the major bills and White House initiatives, and then helps for non-trade lawyers explain which specific trade provisions that big tech is trying to promote would undermine these policies. And this is incredibly urgent because this very day in Bali is a round of negotiations of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That is the Biden administration's major Asian trade negotiation. The Biden administration wants to make that a new worker-centered trade agreement. And on the top of the agenda to deliver that new approach is making sure big tech is not able to rig these rules to undermine the needed domestic and international governance of big tech platforms. And with that, we're going to start by hearing from Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator of Massachusetts. Senator Warren.
For all of the hard work that went into the report that you are launching today. Look, giant corporations have this one great trick. If it looks like regulators just might rein you in, send out your corporate lobbyists to rig a trade deal. From big pharma to big banks, giant corporations use bad trade deals to pad their profits and chip away at protections for workers and consumers. And now that the United States is trying to rein in big tech, finally, Their lobbyists and lawyers are trying to rig the digital trade deals to undermine those new laws. They wrote some of the digital rules into the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the new NAFTA, and now they're trying to rig new trade deals like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework just as well. Now you might be worrying, but how are they using trade deals to do this? Well, this great new report just lays it all out. For example, take artificial intelligence or AI. Companies are increasingly relying on AI to make life-changing decisions for workers and consumers, from hiring to medical care to mortgages. But AI can discriminate on a massive scale. Algorithms can reject loan applications for having black-sounding names. They can penalize workers with disabilities. They can misidentify women of color in police footage. And that is why Congress and regulators are taking a close look at rules for AI. But big tech wants to keep its code in a black box where no one can see what they're doing. Of course, big tech companies only care about secrecy when it's their secrets. But they're fighting tooth and nail to protect their ability to collect, to store, and to sell your data anywhere in the world. And that is why tech lobbyists want trade rules that would let them transfer your data anywhere in the world with only a narrow and basically unusable exception for sensitive personal information. This is outrageous. Voters want Congress to strengthen their digital rights, and our trade agenda should reflect that. So let me just say it again. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for all you're doing to bring big tech scheming to light. And I want you to know, I'm not going to stop fighting in Congress either. Trade deals must work for workers, consumers, and small businesses, not just for billionaire corporations. Thanks for being part of this fight.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Great insights and some marching orders there for all of us. And it is now my honor to follow up with another amazing women member of Congress, Representative Jan Schakowsky, one of my personal heroes, represents the 9th District of Illinois in the House of Representatives. She's a member of the Democratic leadership as Chief Deputy Whip, and she's also the ranking member of the Innovation, Data, and Commerce Subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And she's been a leader in Congress on consumer protection and led the last Congress's privacy bill that had broad bipartisan support and is undoubtedly going to come back because we need federal privacy legislation. Congresswoman Schakowsky, please.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you so much for your great work. It's an honor to be here also with Elizabeth Warren, such a champion and a fighter. So I have been very involved in our trade policy for all my years in Congress, but I have to tell you that I actually never voted for a trade agreement because I am so concerned about consumers and workers and small businesses. But I did vote I did vote, in fact, this time for the United States-Mexico trade agreement because it's perfect, that's for sure. But I was part of a trade working group out of the House of Representatives that helped craft some of the things that are good about it. But in fact, the truth is that this Trump era law or trade agreement that got passed is very flawed when it comes to the digital trade chapter. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Right now, we cannot let this flawed chapter, this digital the trade chapter, set the stage for future trade agreements. And right now on Capitol Hill, we are working hard in order to craft legislation like my legislation that we got out of the Energy and Commerce Committee almost unanimously to provide data privacy online for consumers who really feel like they are being so manipulated by big tech, and to fight the predatory practices by big tech that we are seeing right now, and that work could be threatened by the administration's Indo-Pacific economic framework right now, and we are worried about what is being negotiated at this moment. So let me just tell you a little bit about what was in the legislation that we passed before, and why it is so problematic, and we don't want to repeat what the USMCA agreement has allowed. Among the things that it does, that it gives online platforms legal immunity, because they are looking right now at Section 230 and expanding that, which gives liability protection to corporations in their online work, and this absolutely gives online platforms the kind of liability protection that we don't want. This will what is currently now in the law that we have right now on 230, which does not protect consumers, is now being reevaluated. So we're in the midst. The Congress is in the midst of looking at Section 230. This is not the time for us to have some international agreement about that. USMCA also included language that prohibits limits on cross-border data sharing, and this language is a threat to consumer security and data privacy, and so with limits on data transfers, then these could get around privacy protections by transferring the private data of consumers to countries around the world. In Canada, for example, right now, we are seeing attempts to stop a bill that would protect local news by claiming that bill would be an illegal trade barrier. We don't want to create that kind of possibility for so many things that we want to do to protect consumers in the United States. So these are just a few of the failures that we've already seen that we can't embody in ongoing trade agreements. We know that the Indo-Pacific economic framework is now being negotiated, and right now it would represent 14 nations and 40% of the world's GDP. So this is a really big deal. We have to be very, very careful, and we can't let big tech take over and hurt consumers. And we have an obligation here in the United States in the Congress to do something to stop it right now. That is my mission, and that is what we need to do. While these negotiations are going on, we have to be strong in defending our consumers and our workers and our small businesses. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Schakowsky, and for your leadership on the privacy issues. And the Congresswoman's bill is one of the bills that is explicated in the report we're releasing today, as is a bill of Congressman Takano. It is my honor to introduce Congressman Mark Takano. He represents the 41st District in California. He's the ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, was chairman in the last Congress, and he's a member of the Education and Labor Committee. And I greatly appreciate his leadership, including in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, in educating his colleagues in the House of Representatives about many of these tech issues, joining Congressman Schakowsky as a leader in the U.S. House of Representatives, fighting for good digital governance policies. Mr. Takano, please.
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you for the tremendous work that your organization has done on this issue. You were kind enough to let me look at a draft of the report, and it does raise some very, very large concerns over the digital trade agreement currently being negotiated, one of the pillars of IPEF. Let me make clear that I do believe trade agreements are important, especially in this emerging age of renewed global great power struggles. And Asian countries, I deal with a legislative exchange with the Japanese and the South Koreans, and of course they're such important allies. They bring up trade all the time, and I understand the administration is very much interested in moving in this direction, but we have to insist on a level of transparency and an involvement of Congress, especially when it comes to the possible preemption of some very important laws and preemption of possible legislation like mine, the Forensic Algorithms, Justice and Forensic Algorithms Act. The two potential sections or the two sections of USMCA that are relevant here are about that no country can, who's party to the agreement, can prohibit the transfer or access of source code of software owned by a person or another party. That's what's at stake here, potentially. We don't know because we're not really understanding what's going on in the IPEF negotiations. So what does my bill do? The Justice and Forensic Algorithms Act, which I'm reintroducing, it basically ensures that defendants in a criminal trial have the right to face evidence against them, their accusers. And if there is a company that has written an algorithm that, say, interprets DNA data, the defense has the right to know just how reliable that source code is, how reliable the algorithm is, how reliable, what is the nature of the underlying data. I believe that the due process clause of the Constitution cannot be compromised by the proprietary rights of a software company, and that judges need to be able to say to a software company, you must turn over that software code for evaluation. And much more, my bill would enlist the resources of the federal government to help set guidelines and to be able to examine, to set guidelines for forensic algorithms. Because you know what? Let's face it, criminal defendants may or may not have the ability or the resources to be able to do this on their own. And we've seen contradictory results based on different forensic algorithm products in different courts. And people can be convicted of a crime based on this technology. They may even be convicted of a capital crime. So the stakes are pretty high, and we need to be very, very vigilant about the kind of language that ends up in a trade agreement such as IPEF. And also at stake here is what role does Congress have to play? Can this agreement go into effect without Congress? My sense is I don't think it should. And I know that on a bipartisan basis, some of my colleagues in the Senate have already raised their concerns with the administration over whether this agreement needs a vote of Congress. So, Lori, those are my concerns. And thank you for what an honor to be here with Jan Schakowsky and Senator Warren. And what amazing work your organization does to protect the interests of ordinary American people.
Congressman Takano, thank you very much for being part of this event and for your leadership in Congress on those important human and civil rights issues in the criminal justice system. So I have a question for Congresswoman Schakowsky and Congressman Takano, which is, given there have been waves of members of Congress and waves of trade votes, but right now there hasn't been a trade vote for a couple of years, and there are a lot of new members of Congress. What is your sense of how many members of Congress realize that a trade agreement could literally internationally preempt, conflict, undermine the policy space that they think as members of Congress is theirs to legislate and make the laws with respect to big tech or anything else, or for that matter, the executive orders from the White House? How many of the new members of Congress, as you're meeting your new colleagues in these first months of the 118th Congress, do you think they're becoming aware of this? I think it's going to be bad news if they don't. What is your view?
So I think that you are absolutely right, that we have to make sure that members of Congress, not just new members, not all members, follow these trade agreements and the possible consequences of the trade agreements, even as we are sitting in our committees and working on legislation like a comprehensive online privacy bill, that this could be undermined by what could happen in a trade agreement that affects so many countries around the world, and that could preclude in many ways our ability to actually act on behalf of our consumers. Imagine, I think, if they really understood that their data could be transferred to countries around the world. I think they would be more engaged in this process of weighing in. They'd want to have more to say about this agreement. So far, it looks like this could happen without any vote by the Congress, but certainly we need to be more informed. I think part of it is just, that those of us who are engaged need to make sure that happens. But we think that the administration also ought to make sure that we are informed as work goes on, because the consequences are very, very severe, or possibly severe, and we want to make sure that the trade agreement is fair.
Lori, anything to add, please?
Lori, let me say that that members of Congress tend to be focused completely on domestic issues, and they may or may not have an understanding of their connection to foreign policy and trade policy. So in the foreign policy and national security space, there are awfully persuasive arguments for why we need trade agreements, and they're going to be awfully compelling. It's going to be cited as a key reason as to why we need to enter into trade agreements. But we as members of Congress, we need to be up to speed to be able to test those arguments, to be able to push back on them when they jeopardize consumer rights, environmental rights, consumer related to like the pharmaceuticals and the pricing, ways to preempt whatever protections we put in for consumers in our country. But something as basic as due process in our criminal proceedings could be at stake because the administration or the powers that be argue that we need a trade agreement to to bring our allies close together. And we do need those trade agreements, but we need to make sure those trade agreements allow members of Congress to see what's actually in them, to be able to evaluate them. Look, I'm as the ranking member and former chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I mean, you might think, well, digital information. We collect. We're collecting up to 1 million DNA samples. It's called the Million Veteran Project, and they're being sequenced. I'm concerned about the acquisition of Oracle of Cerner in the effort to combine the medical records, the electronic medical records, with the DoD. Think about all that data. Think about all the medical records that are sort of connected to that. The medical records are connected to health histories. A very unique, valuable resource to be used for researchers. Think about the value of that data. I want to make sure that data is protected, that it's an American resource, and much is at stake in these digital agreements. So I just want to say thank you for your work, and Congress needs to assert its role in the Constitution over these agreements, because what's at stake are the domestic laws, domestic policy, and progressives in particular need to get both up on renew or update their view on foreign policy and trade and how it connects to a domestic agenda.
That is both of these are great insights. And I guess I would sum up by saying members of Congress who are legislating in Congress, lot of them need to pay attention to the fact that international trade agreements can be great, but the question is, what are the rules? What are the specific terms in those agreements, and whether or not those are consistent with the domestic legislating and the domestic policy goals that they are promoting. And to that end, it comes to mind two things that are in the news all the time, which is the China data fights, all of this talk about on a bipartisan basis, we don't want data to go to China, which directly conflicts with the point that Congressman Chakowski made about the data flows provisions that the big tech guys want to put into these agreements, because many of the countries in the Indo-Pacific economic framework do a lot of business with China. So there's a lot of data flows there. So if we have a rule that says you can't limit data flows to all of those countries, how the heck are we going to limit data flows to China? Or if you look at Senator Wyden's bill on having export controls regime, like we do with military dual use goods, but for data, for keeping it from countries that may have malign interests. That gets to what Mr. Takano was just saying about that big pile of veterans data that could be amazing for researchers to have all that information for the future of our health and for new medicine and treatments, but in the wrong hands, what would it be? So with those two great insights and the participation from these two wonderful members of Congress, I'm now going to turn the floor over to the research director at Rethink Trade, and that is Danielle Rangel. He has done a lot of the investigations and research into how basically finding many of these laws that conflict and how the specific rules that big tech is trying to put into the IPEF could undermine the policy space now being occupied in the last Congress and coming up with the reintroduction of, for instance, Congresswoman Chakowski's privacy bill, Mr. Takano's due process bill, and many other of the dozen bills featured in this report. So Daniel, take it away. Please walk us through briefly the findings in the report. And may I urge everyone to actually read the report, because it does not require a law degree or to be a member of Congress. We have unpacked the technical terms and then put them side by side by these bills that are bills you want for our lives to go right in this tech era. Daniel, please.
Thank you, Lori. And first of all, I also want to express my gratitude to Senator Warren and Representatives Chakowski and Takano for joining us and for their leadership in promoting all of these important policies that we have been discussing. As Lori said, our idea with this report is basically unpacking this abstract notion of undermining policy space as something that is tangible and people can understand the way in which it could impact the different legislative agendas, but also the administration's proposals in this sphere. So the most problematic provisions that we can find in the USMCA digital chapter, which we think that is being promoted as the model for the new negotiations like IPEF, but also in other fora, are these. The first one is Article 19.16, which confers secrecy guarantees for algorithms and source code. Articles 19.11 and 19.12, which are related to cross-border data flows and the location of computing facilities. And the third one is the Article 19.4, which includes a non-discrimination obligation for digital products, which already has been used to attack facially neutral laws that could have a larger impact on bigger firms because they are large, not because they are of a particular country. So what we want to show with this report is how systemic is the problem. Starting with the source code provision, here we map out different legislative proposals that are related to what we could call the algorithmic justice or algorithmic transparency push. What we want is laws that make sure that the algorithms are making crucial decisions in our lives are not biased, are not inaccurate, and they are actually delivering the result that we wanted to deliver. And in that way, Representative Takano, but many other lawmakers have been proposing rules that would achieve that purpose. There is the Civil Rights and Algorithms title of the ADPPA, the privacy legislation that Mr. Tchaikovsky is sponsoring, and many other law enforcement and criminal justice reform bills, including Mr. Takano's bills on justice in forensic algorithms. And there are also other bills that want to give access to researchers to specific information, potentially including code and algorithm information from online platforms. The bills that we have identified that have what we could call proactive external monitoring obligation, which basically means that companies have to monitor and have to give access to a third party to make sure that the algorithm is not biased or is not inaccurate or is not discriminatory. Those bills that are the Civil Rights and Algorithm title of the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, but also the Facial Recognition Act of 2022 and Mr. Takano's bill, those will be in special trouble if we pair them with USMCA style obligations. Why is that? Because as Mr. Takano said, basically this rule would ban countries from requiring access to source code. And this is a direct contradiction to this idea of proactive external monitoring obligations, which is not saved by the fact that these kind of provisions have exceptions that are very specific, and they would only allow a country to require access to source code for specific investigations. Since these are general requirements, they will be in conflict with that specific provision. Similarly, as Lori was explaining, these unfettered guarantees of free data flows would limit the way in which we can enact privacy and data security policies. The ADPPA, My Body, My Data Act of 2022, and the Four Amendments is Not for Sale Act, those are all bills that will include individual rights, but also data control obligations that will be harder to enforce for entities that are not located in the US. And whenever policymakers want to regulate, or maybe either through legislation or through regulation, certain ways in which we can enforce those rules for these kind of entities, that will require regulating cross-border data flows, which will likely contradict Article 19.1 and Article 19.12 of the USMCA. And if we have this kind of provisions in other agreements, then it's going to be very hard for lawmakers to make sure that our privacy is protected. Finally, we have the non-discrimination for digital products provision. This notion of non-discrimination in trade is arcane, and it has been talked about since the beginning of trade agreements. However, the way in which this provision is especially designed in a way that is open-ended and is very broad in USMCA has been used to target already the bill that Mrs. Tchaikovsky mentioned, Canada's Online News Act, but also the notion of non-discrimination has been used to attack South Korea's App Store law, the Australian News Media Bargaining Code, the EU's Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, and Germany's GWB Digitization Act, which is basically a revamp of Germany's competition regime. All of these bills intend to level the playing field and grant smaller digital companies the opportunity to compete in digital markets. And these bills also have US equivalents. So basically, we traced all of the different bills that are similar in the US to these laws that have already been passed in other countries. And what we have found out is that by undermining under the trade notion of non-discrimination these foreign laws, big tech companies and their industry associations intend to undermine as well the legislative proposals that are being made here in the US. So the stakes are very high. Basically, what we are seeing here is that I skipped one thing. And this is not a hypothetical threat. What we have seen is that already the Computer Communications Industry Association has claimed that the Canada's Online News Act is in conflict with this digital trade provision of USMCA. Having similar rules in IPEF will give big tech grounds to attack Australia's News Media Bargaining Code, the South Korea's App Store law, and many other potential future bills that countries might come up with to level the playing field. So yeah, the stakes are very high. What we're seeing here is a push to have a global low-road digital regulation model in which the new secrecy guarantees for code and algorithms will thwart the algorithmic transparency push, where this idea of unfettered cross-border data flows would not allow countries to really protect citizens' privacy and data security, and where the idea of non-discrimination in digital trade and for digital products would undermine those laws that intend to level the playing field and allow smaller companies to compete with bigger digital firms. We want with this report to contribute to putting the spotlight on the ongoing trade negotiations that will be crucial for the future of digital regulation. And with that, I'll send it back to you, Lori.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And again, folks, please check out this report. You can find it at rethinktrade.org. That's rethinktrade.org. And you'll also find other materials there about how this digital trade sneak attack by big tech could undermine workers' rights, anti-monopoly policies, etc. So in a way, Daniel just pointed out the importance of the issue that Congressman Tchaikovsky and Congressman Takano and Senator Warren are spotlighting with respect to the current trade negotiations. So these backward rules, as Congressman Tchaikovsky mentioned, were in the USMCA. And for anyone who says, wait, if it was already in the USMCA, aren't we already in trouble? Those were rules foisted by the Trump administration on Canada and Mexico. So the Canadian and Mexican governments have no interest in having those enforced, including, as we've seen, to attack a popular Canadian law. So at stake now is whether that same flawed model would be expanded worldwide. That's the fight. That's big tech's agenda. First, in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which, as Congressman Tchaikovsky said, 14 countries, 40% of the world economy. There is an America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity that is a similar regional agreement in the Americas that negotiations could start soon. And there are WTO, World Trade Organization, proximate negotiations. This agenda cannot be globalized to handcuff policymakers worldwide. Rather, there are some things that need to be fixed in the digital sphere, for sure. Domestic policy is international policy, but we can't have preemption of that policy space through a stealthy, secretive, non-inclusive trade negotiation that ends up actually not being about trade. Because I think the punchline to take away from all of this, and listening to Congressman Takano and to Congressman Schakowsky, these issues aren't about trade. This is a fairly stealthy Trojan horse maneuver. In fact, if you think about it, due process, criminal procedure, convictions, U.S. criminal trials, privacy about our personal health or other data, why would that even be in a trade agreement? And that is the point. So the last thought I will leave with everybody is, as you get informed about this, using the materials in this report and the other materials on our website, please do pass the word, because the best way to make sure we don't have international preemption of this very important digital governance, fighting against big tech abuses, is if we all participate in the Dracula strategy. We need to drag this information into the sunlight. This is something that can only succeed if it's done behind closed doors and nobody knows about it. So with that, let me again express my enormous appreciation and thanks to Congresswoman Schakowsky, to Congressman Takano, to Senator Warren, to Daniel for the presentations, for the excellent leadership and work. And with that, I thank the entire audience for joining us. Please pass the word and get engaged. Thank you very much.